This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
Okay. Show me.
Sometimes that is better.
Welcome to the Prairie Land Paranormal Podcast.
Be sure you never, ever scream.
A podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange.
There are no accidents, no coincidences.
I am your host, Eric Carrier.
The boogeyman is real.
And they mostly come at night.
My co-host is Jessica Carrier.
Come out, wherever you are.
Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown.
Be one of us.
Let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is the Prairie Land Paranormal Podcast, and I am your host, Eric Carrier. We have a great show planned for you today. I'm here as always with my wife and my co-host, Jessica. Jessica, what do we have in store for our listeners today?
Today, we are going to be talking about Haiti, voodoo, and real-life zombies.
Ooh, like The Walking Dead?
No, Hollywoodized zombies aren't real. The focus of today's show is to show the true origins of the zombie legend.
So, no walkers, creepers, roamers, biters, fleshies, bonies, ankle biters, lurkers, shufflers, rotters, raiders, or Z's?
No, just good old-fashioned zombies.
If you're a new listener and you are here for the first time, welcome. We are pleased to eat you. If you have been around for a while, welcome back. We know that there are a lot of podcasts out there that are competing for your time, and we are grateful that you are giving that time to us. I guess you could say that our show is a no-brainer. Was that a zombie groan?
No, it was a real-life groan, because your jokes are terrible.
So that joke was a dead end?
Ah.
And that's why zombies don't make good comedians, because all they get is groans.
Ah.
See?
Move on before I lose my mind.
Okay. As podcasters, we do need your support to keep producing the content that we do. Jessica, how can our listeners support our show?
If you'd like to support our podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. First, you can continue to share the show.
This is by far the most important thing that you can do to help the show grow. Indie shows like ours only survive by word of mouth, so please keep sharing it with everyone.
Second, you can continue to vote for us on the Paranormality magazine Paranormal Top 25.
Please keep voting for us each and every month at paranormalityradio.com. This is amazing and free publicity for the show, and we are currently listed at number 5 there.
Yay!
Thank you again to all of you who have been voting for us.
Third, if you'd like to support our show financially, you can support our merch store, which is open and live on our website.
Fourth, if you'd like to support a worthy cause, then you can leave us a tip. Those tips will be donated to Operation Underground Railroad.
This organization rescues children all around the world from sex trafficking and from sexual exploitation.
We hope that you will join us in supporting this organization, and to show our support, we will be matching the total monthly donations up to $50.
The last way you can support our show is to come and hang out with us on social media. We have accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and love to hang out and meet you guys there.
All of those accounts and our merch store can be accessed through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. Lastly, we have another giveaway to tell you about. Michelle Apollonia, the owner and the artist behind Breathless Beauty's dark art dolls, has donated one of her dolls to us to give away.
This doll's name is Aged Anna, and she plays a creepy lullaby as her head spins around 360 degrees.
Trust me, this doll is spooky. We'll put up some pictures and a video of her on our Instagram page later this week.
If you would like to win Aged Anna, join the contest at paranormalityradio.com.
You can check out more of Michelle's work on her Etsy site, Breathless Beauties US. Jess, is there anything else?
Nope.
Okay, let's get started with today's show.
The term zombie first appeared in Haiti in the 17th and 18th centuries, when the country was known as Saint-Domingue. The country, ruled by France, hauled in African slaves to work on sugar plantations. Slavery under the French rule was extremely brutal, and half of the slaves imported from Africa died every year, which only led to the import of more. The zombie archetype, as it appears in Haiti, mirrored the inhumanity that existed there from 1625 to around 1800, and was a projection of the African slaves' relentless misery and subjugation. For them, death was a release from this misery.
Haitian slaves believed that dying would release them back to Guinea, back to Guinea or Africa in general, to an afterlife where they could be free again. Though suicide was common among Haitian slaves, those who took their own lives wouldn't be allowed to return to Guinea. Instead, they'd be condemned to sulk in Hispaniola for eternity. An undead slave denied their own bodies, but yet trapped inside them. A soulless zombie. For Haitian slaves, the invention of the zombie was proof that the abuse they suffered was in a way more powerful than life itself. They had imagined a scenario in which they could continue to be slaves even after death.
The original zombies, much different than the current brain-eating type of pop culture, were not slaves to the flesh, but to their owners. After the Haitian Revolution in 1804, and at the end of French colonism, the zombie myth became intertwined as part of Haiti's folklore. The myth evolved slightly and was folded into the voodoo religion, with Haitians believing zombies were corpses reanimated by shamans and voodoo priests. Sorcerers, known as bokor, used their bewitched undead as free labor or to carry out nefarious tasks. UC Irvine professor Amy Willens has pointed this out in her writings on zombies. On several occasions after the Revolution, Haiti teetered on the brink of reinstating slavery. The zombies of the Haitian voodoo religion were a more fractured representation of the anxieties of slavery, mixed as they were with the occult trappings of sorcerers and necromancy.
It was in this form that the Haitian myth first crossed paths with pop culture, appearing in the film White Zombie. Although the film doesn't begin to transform the undead in the way that George Romero's films and the subsequent zombie industrial complex would, it's notable for its introduction of white people as encroachers in the zombie legend. It would take another few decades or so until Haiti's colonial history and their suffering would be completely excised from the zombie myth for good, leaving nothing but brain-eating goons.
Today, zombies are almost always linked with the end of the world via a zombie apocalypse, a global pandemic that turns most of the human population into beasts ravenous for flesh of their own kind. Entertainment that has unfortunately been stripped of history for the sole purpose of escapism. Zombies are no longer an outlet for fear and dehumanization, but for fantasy. Create an oblique asymmetry between the zombie then and the zombie now. The original emerged in a context where humans were denied control over their own bodies and sought death as an escape. And now, in pop culture, the zombie has come to serve as the primary symbol of escapism itself, where the fictional enslavement of some provides a perverse kind of freedom for everyone else.
Despite the perversion of the zombie by pop culture, to many people, both in Haiti and elsewhere, zombies are very real. They are not a joke, and they are something to be taken seriously. Belief in magic and witchcraft is widespread throughout Haiti and the Caribbean, often in the forms of religions such as voodoo and Santeria.
Voodoo is the sensationalized pop culture caricature of voodoo, an Afro-Caribbean religion that originated in Haiti, though followers can be found in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, the United States, and elsewhere.
Voodoo refers to a whole assortment of cultural elements. This encompasses personal creeds and practices of voodoo, including systems of folk medicine, ethics, proverbs, stories, songs, and folklore.
Voodoo teaches belief in a supreme being called Bunji, an unknowable and uninvolved creator god. Voodoo believers worship many spirits called Loa, each one of whom is responsible for a specific domain or part of life. In addition to helping or impeding human affairs, Loa can also manifest themselves by possessing the bodies of their worshippers.
Followers of Voodoo also believe in universal energy and a soul that can leave the body during dreams and spirit possession. In Christian theology, spiritual possession is usually considered to be an act of evil, either Satan or some demonic entity trying to enter an unwilling human vessel. In Voodoo, however, possession by Loa is desired. In a ceremony guided by a priest or priestess, this possession is considered a valuable first-hand spiritual experience and connection with the spirit world.
Voodoo originated with slaves who combined elements of their West African traditions and beliefs with Roman Catholicism imposed upon them by their masters in a process called syncretism. A 1865 law forbade the practice of African religions and required all masters to Christianize their slaves within 8 days of their arrival. Slavery was condoned by the Catholic Church as a tool for converting Africans to morally upright Christians. Slaves forced to adopt Catholic rituals thus gave them double meanings, and in the process, many of their spirits became associated with Christian saints.
Followers of Voodoo were often persecuted by authorities who demonized their religion, falsely attributing it to human sacrifices, cannibalism, and other atrocities. Many fundamentalist Christians still regard Voodoo and voodoo with suspicion, associating it with the occult, black magic, and Satanism. Even today, voodoo is often used as an adjective to describe something that is unknowable, mysterious, or simply unworkable. Consider, for instance, George H.W. Bush using the term voodoo economics to disparage Ronald Reagan's monetary policies.
Voodoo has a largely undeserved reputation as a sinister religion. Although some voodoo rituals involve animal sacrifices, it is hardly unique. Many other religious traditions involve animal bloodletting, including Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism. The irony is that voodoo's best known and most sensational features, including voodoo dolls and zombies, have little to do with its actual beliefs and practices. Zombies are an especially good example of how a religious element can be taken out of context and become a global phenomenon.
The original Haitian zombies were not villains, but victims. Haitian zombies were said to be people brought back from the dead and controlled through magical means by priests called bokors. In Voodoo, all people die in 2 ways: naturally, by sickness or by God's will, and unnaturally, by things such as murder and or dying before our time. Those who die unnaturally linger at their grave, unable to rejoin ancestors until the gods approve. Souls are vulnerable at this time. Their will may be snatched up by a powerful sorcerer or bokor and locked in a bottle, which the bokor uses to control their undead but unliving body. Other times, he lets their bodies rest, but uses just their soul.
This does not have to be unpleasant for the soul or body. Under the right circumstances, a hard-working man might prefer to continue working rather than lie waiting in the ground, especially if he is used by the bokor to help with healing magic. More unsavory bokor, though, could purposely kill a man to make a zombie, then force him into mindless toil or worse, black magic and evil intentions.
Bokors create zombie slaves through a process called zombification. The exact methods and concoctions used vary among bokors, but the general process, believed by Haitians, is as follows. Some zombification processes use blood and hair from their victims in addition to using voodoo dolls, while others involve a carefully prepared mixture called coup de powder, or powder strike. This is made of mystical herbs, human remains, and animal parts. Administering this mixture can also vary from ingestion, injection, or even by a blow dart.
Once the mixture has been made by the bokor and administered to the victim, it starts to take effect on the body. The victim becomes immobile, has an incredibly faint heartbeat, and his or her breathing is drastically reduced, and within a few minutes, the victim appears dead. While in this death-resembled state, the victim is still fully aware of his surroundings, but cannot express himself. Once taken to the hospital and declared dead by the doctor, the seemingly lifeless body is buried in a grave.
After the body is buried, the bokor enters the grave and digs up the body. This must occur within 8 hours of the burial, or the victim will die of asphyxiation. Next, the bokor performs an ancient voodoo rite where he or she captures the victim's soul. This must occur within 7 days following death, while it is still hovering over the corpse, or by spreading poisons in the form of a cross on the threshold of the victim's doorway. Either way, this affects a split in the spiritual parts of the victim and produces two completely different types of zombies, the spirit zombie and the zombie cadaver. Then he traps the spirit zombie part of the soul in a small clay jar or some other type of common container. This container is hidden in a secret place known only to the bokor, and is finally wrapped in a piece of the victim's clothing or some other personal possession.
After a day or two, the bokor then administers a hallucinogenic mixture called the zombie cucumber that revives the victim and is used to keep the zombie in a state of submissive confusion. In this state, the zombie cannot speak, has no memory, and no longer resembles its past human personality. As a result, the zombie is easy to control, and the bokor can use the zombie as a slave. The zombies are completely under the rule of the bokor that made them, and consequently work as slaves until the bokor dies. Once they are released from their slave labor, the zombies can finally return to their home village or place of burial and die.
A major concern in Haitian folklore concerning zombies is the act of feeding salt to a zombie. While zombies are usually not particularly dangerous, giving them salt will return their senses and restore their personality. This will lead the zombies to attack the bokor who created them, or to return to their place of burial for their final death.
While zombification seems at first to be a strictly physical experience, there is additionally a psychological aspect in the ritual and is a spiritual process. A psychological or cultural predisposition is imperative in order for the victim to become a zombie. After being buried alive, the victim's reawakening as a zombie follows a psychotic state. The victim is able to reconstruct their identity as a zombie due to a combination of the psychosis induced by the drugs, the psychological trauma of being buried alive, and the strong beliefs in zombies and their culture. This all contributes to the psychological aspect that controls the victim's perceptions and actions. Living in Haiti, and the social reinforcement of their beliefs in zombies further contributes to their zombie identity and experience.
You may think that Haitians fear zombies, but that's not the case. What they fear is becoming a zombie against their will, such as with the cases of Clairvius Narcisse and Francina Ilias.
On April 30th, 1962, a man by the name of Clairvius Narcisse checked into the Albert Schweitzer Hospital in Haiti. He had a fever and complained of a sensation described as bugs crawling on his skin. The staff gave him a room at the hospital, and his condition quickly deteriorated. 2 days later, doctors pronounced him dead. An official death certificate confirmed the end of his life. His immediate family held a funeral and interred the body at the local cemetery. They sealed the coffin with nails and buried him in a traditional manner. If you think death is the end, ask Clairvius Narcisse.
At some point after his funeral, someone disturbed Narcisse's grave. During the night, a bokor dug him up and removed him. Narcisse was beaten, bound, and forced to drink a potion before being taken to a sugar plantation. Once there, he encountered others in a similar state to his own. Narcisse had to work in the fields, and the bokor constantly gave him additional injections of the same potion to maintain his zombie-like state of mind. For the next 2 years, Narcisse remained on the plantation until the bokor that recruited him died. Even though he was nothing more than a lifeless husk, Narcisse took his chance to wander off unseen. 18 years afterward, Narcisse returned to his home village, where he sought out his sister, Angelina.
Angelina was in a village market when Clairvius approached and identified himself. As proof of his claim that he was her brother, he added a childhood nickname that only the two of them were aware of. Understandably, Angelina was shocked, but she did assist in an investigation with help from the rest of the family. This investigation showed that Narcisse was who he appeared to be. He really was Angelina's brother.
Narcisse's story made for some sensational headlines. Everything that happened to him, from the moments prior to admitting himself to the hospital to tracking down his sister almost 2 decades later, was all done while he was conscious in a near vegetative state. Narcisse could fully recall the doctors declaring him dead and being buried alive. He also claimed to be conscious when the bokor drug him up shortly afterward. The memory of his 2 years as a slave still haunted him, and he remembered working the plantation every waking moment from dusk to dawn. This very long day was only interrupted once for a quick meal break.
According to Narcisse, conditions proved too much for one of the other workers, who took matters into his own hands by killing the bokor. Now that their bondage came to an end, the remaining zombies took this chance to escape the plantation. Narcisse also explained his reasoning for not finding his way back home sooner. He had quarreled with his brother prior to the day Narcisse became ill, and he outright blamed his brother for what had happened to him, and only returned once the brother had passed away.
In 1976, 30-year-old Francina Ilias, a market woman, entered the St. Michael de Atelier Hospital in Haiti, apparently suffering from digestive problems. She was dizzy and weak. The doctors treated her stomach problem, then released her. Unfortunately, she was pronounced dead a few days later at home and buried in a local cemetery.
3 years later, in April 1979, Ilias's mother was summoned to the Ennery marketplace by a woman who worked there. A strange, pale, and very thin woman had been found squatting in the market, a woman who looked a lot like her daughter. Ilias's mother confirmed their suspicions. It was in fact her daughter, Francina, who had been buried 3 years earlier.
The strange woman was reported to the Americans at the Baptist Mission, and Jay Osherman and his wife traveled to Inri to investigate. They found Francina in a unique situation. Ilias's mother and family were refusing to take the woman in, and no one else wanted to be responsible for her either. Ilias was largely unresponsive and could not care for herself, so a local judge, faced with a legally dead person that wasn't wanted by her family or village, agreed to give Osherman legal custody.
When word of the incident reached Dr. Lamarck Duyon at the Center of Psychiatry and Neurology in Port-au-Prince, he drove out to Passe Rhine to investigate. Duyon had personally investigated all public reports of zombies since 1961, so his interest was keen. Eventually, Ilias was transferred to his clinic in Port-au-Prince so he could examine her and attempt to reverse her mental state.
When Ilias was found, her grave had been checked. Her coffin was full of rocks. Duyon checked her birth certificate and found it had been filed and signed off by a local official in the area, not by a doctor. Whatever she had experienced in the 3 years she was missing, Ilias was now very much withdrawn and unresponsive, and her memories of the period were very limited. Ilias regained her abilities to walk, but never fully regained her mental functions.
Further investigation into the case suggested that she had been zombified by a man whom she had rejected as a husband. Her marriage with him had been arranged by her mother, but Ilias instead had a child with another man. Ilias's mother, angry at her, was believed to have arranged for her to be zombified and gave her to the husband her family had picked.
Join us after the break, and we will discuss Wade Davis, an anthropologist and ethnobotanist from Canada who potentially cracked the zombie voodoo code.
Don't be afraid. Lock the doors. Turn out the lights. And climb into bed. It's time for Hillbilly Dead Time Stories.
This is Jerry from the Hillbilly Horror Stories podcast. You just heard the intro to our new video series on YouTube, Hillbilly Dead Time Stories. I hope you'll check it out. If you're not really a video person, check out the Hillbilly Horror Stories podcast, where my wife Tracy and myself will give you a new story of the unexplained every week. You can check out the audio version of Hillbilly Dead Time Stories as a bonus episode every Wednesday.
Okay, Jess, so that was our research into real zombie legends. What are your initial thoughts?
First of all, before anything, I'm thinking what terrible families these two people who were turned into zombies had. I mean, it's bad enough if someone comes in who is a stranger or who you don't know very much, or even someone you do know, and decides to have you be a zombie. But the fact that these two people, their family members, decided to turn them into zombies just is really horrible to me.
Yeah, how terrible of a family do you have to have in order for them to sell you into zombie forced labor?
Exactly. Force you to marry someone as a zombie. I mean, really.
You know, part of that story that we didn't share was that during her time of forced marriage, she actually had 3 children. None of them survived, but she apparently had zombie babies.
Oh, that is horrible.
So does this sound like zombification or forced drug addiction?
I guess it could be either. Nowadays, you have things like human trafficking, where young children, usually young women, are taken and force-fed drugs so that they comply with whatever their overlords, I guess you could call them, their kidnappers, demand of them. And that is, another form, I guess, of being a zombie, being forced to do something against your will, and that being aided by the effects of drugs.
Well, it seems like things like that have been happening at least in Haiti since the 17th or 18th centuries. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jess, are you familiar with Wade Davis?
A little bit, yes. I've been reading up on his discovery in regards to what actually zombie powder is.
Yeah, so Wade Davis is a scientist. He's from Canada. His credentials are as an anthropologist and an ethnobotanist. And in the 1980s, he actually went to Haiti to investigate the zombie phenomenon, and in particular, the powders that were used by the bokor in order to induce zombification. Wade didn't particularly believe that this was voodoo or magic, but he did believe that he found something that could potentially poison victims into a zombie-like state. And when he was able to get his hands on some of these zombie powders, and when he was able to get these zombie powders tested, he found that they contained a very powerful neurotoxin called tetrodotoxin. He also found that they may contain another toxin called bufotoxin. Jessica, are you familiar with either of these two toxins?
A little bit. After doing some research on this topic, I was able to learn a little bit about these toxins and how they affect your body. I don't know if I'm an expert on it, but I know a little bit about it.
Well, unless you're a toxicologist, there's no way you're going to be an expert on either of these.
Exactly. The way that they work in the body is a little bit mysterious to me, but it does make some sense.
All right, so let's start with tetrodotoxin. So tetrodotoxin is a sodium channel blocker. It inhibits the firing of action potentials in neurons by binding to the voltage-gated sodium channels in nerve cell membranes and blocking the passage of sodium into the neurons.
So in other words, it blocks salt so they can't go into the neurons.
Yes, and if you've ever taken an animal physiology course, you know that sodium, potassium, and chloride all play a very important role in maintaining action potentials or the ability of our neurons to fire. And if you affect any of these electrolytes, the body's ability to function and create an action potential that allows for our muscles to move or for our heart to beat or for our diaphragm to be able to breathe are all affected. So you can see that by blocking sodium channels, our body won't be able to do certain things that are required for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tetrodotoxin primarily comes from fish that are in the family of tetraodontiforms. And these fish include fish such as the pufferfish, the porcupine fish, the ocean sunfish, and the triggerfish. Several of these fish carry this toxin, which, if you want to get more scientific, is actually a product of a symbiotic bacteria breakdown from Pseudoaltromonas, Pseudomonas, and Vibrio that are all found in water.
That is interesting. And on top of it all, people still eat these fish.
Yes, and that is how most people are poisoned by these fish. For instance, pufferfish is readily consumed in Japan, and those who prepare this for consumption have to go through what's called a fugu certification, and it's a certification that is government issued and shows that these people know how to fillet, cook, and serve pufferfish in Japan. This certification can take up to 2 to 3 years to get.
That's dedication there.
Yes, it's dedication not to kill the people that eat your food.
Yeah, can you imagine being the chef that accidentally poisons someone?
Yeah, you're not going to stay in business very long if you poison everyone who comes to eat your pufferfish. Now, I've never personally eaten pufferfish, but I hear that even though it's prepared in its correct way in the right form, it still makes your mouth tingly and weird feeling.
Yeah, why eat it then?
So, Jess, what are some of the common symptoms of tetrodotoxin poisoning?
Well, you're going to have symptoms within 30 minutes of eating it. And it may be delayed for up to 4 hours. However, if it's a fatal dose, you're going to know within 17 minutes of eating it. First, you're going to have paresthesia of the lips, which is basically numbness in your lips and your tongue. And that's going to be followed by the paresthesia in your extremities. You're going to have hypersalivation, sweating, headache, weakness, lethargy, incoordination, tremors, paralysis, cyanosis. I don't know what cyanosis, Eric.
It's turning blue.
Okay, cyanosis, aphonia, which is the inability to speak, dysphagia,
Inability or difficulty swallowing.
and seizures. That does not sound like it's pleasant. Then you have gastrointestinal symptoms that are often severe, and they can include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and then death is usually secondary to respiratory failure. And there is no antidote for this.
Nope. If you have these symptoms, you are going to die. So Wade also thought that these powders also contained bufotoxin. Now, if you don't know what bufotoxin is, it's a type of steroid lactone that is carried in the parotid gland, skin, and the venom of many different types of toads. It's also found in several other types of amphibians. Jess, what happens when our dog goes outside and licks a toad?
She's so annoying sometimes. She doesn't just lick a toad, she tries to eat the toad. And she gets the toad in her mouth, and then she will just have lots of saliva, and she won't want to eat, and she'll just be sick. And the thing is after doing this one time, you think she would learn, but she doesn't. She goes and tries to eat the toads over and over again.
Yeah, so this toxin's found in toads, amphibians, and in some cases, mushrooms. So you can imagine how someone may come in contact with these and become poisoned by them. You'd have to, eating toad meat, eating toad eggs, swallowing live toads on a bet.
Or even mushrooms.
Or mushrooms, yes. Yeah. So symptoms of this type of exposure tends to be very rapid with multiple episodes of vomiting. That's also associated with abdominal pain, diarrhea, and from the lack of
fluids, I guess you could say.
Fluids and hydration, collapse, and or death. Some of the slower effects that kind of take place over a period of about an hour include cardiac type events where your pulse is going to be very rapid and or sometimes slowed. This will result in arrhythmias. Your potassium levels are going to end up being affected, and ultimately you're going to have death from a cardiac arrhythmia most likely. And guess what? There's also no antidote for this. There was one more species of plant that Wade also thought might be involved in these powders. That species is called Datura. Jessica, you're the plant guru in this family. What are some of the other common names that the Datura family may be found under?
Yeah, thorn apples, Jimson weed, the devil's trumpet, moonflower, devil's weed, hell's bells.
I like that one. Hell's bells sounds like a fun flower.
Sounds like a 60s name for a psychotropic flower.
Well, I think you can tell by the names that this species of plant is very poisonous.
Yes.
It is also potentially psychoactive, especially the seeds and or the flowers, which can cause respiratory depression, arrhythmias, fever, delirium, hallucinations, and then ultimately what's called anticholinergic syndrome. And anticholinergic syndrome has a really neat mnemonic that is used often in medicine. Jess, do you want to repeat that?
All right. Blind as a bat, mad as a hatter, red as a beet, hot as a hare, dry as a bone, the bowel and bladder lose their tone, and the heart runs alone.
So it doesn't sound very pleasant, right?
No, not an experience you want to go through.
So those are all the symptoms of anticholinergic syndrome, which is part of the toxicity of these Datura plants. Now, there is some good news. There does seem to be an antidote for this particular type of toxin. So as far as treatments, there's gastric lavage, which is pumping of the stomach, and activated charcoal, which help to reduce the absorption of the toxin in the person's stomach. But there is a drug also called physostigmine, which is also used to reverse the effects of the poison. So ultimately, Wade postulated that the tetrodotoxin and the bufotoxin could be used to comatose a person, and that the datura could be used to keep them in a stuporous state.
So in other words, zombie.
A zombie. So Wade ended up writing a book about the research that he did in Haiti, and this book is called The Serpent and the Rainbow. And in 1988, Wes Craven, who is the mastermind behind the Nightmare on Elm Street series, created a movie based off of this book by the same name that also follows the story of Clairvius Narcisse. So as with all research, it can be scientifically touted and it can come under scientific criticism. And that's not any different than what happened to Wade's research.
Yes, this is actually a natural, normal thing and a good thing when science comes around and questions other scientists. And one thing you have to have when it comes to science is repeatability. And basically, Davis's claims were challenged by skeptical scientists because they couldn't really be repeated. They pointed out they were kind of unscientific in that the zombie powder he provided, it was inconsistent, and the amounts of the neurotoxin contained in the samples were not really high enough to create zombies.
How did they know what amounts were needed in order to create zombies, I wonder?
I know, maybe something that wouldn't kill you, but yet would still keep you partially alive or obedient. I don't know. How would they do that?
Yeah, they also considered some of his research to be unethical because he helped some of these bokors dig up freshly deceased bodies and things of that nature. So there's one more theory as to how zombification may occur, and this comes from Jessica Jake, and she believes it may be caused from what's called bromonism. Bromonism is a syndrome that results from long-term use or consumption of bromine. This usually results from bromine-based sedatives such as potassium bromide and or lithium bromide. This is an interesting idea because in the case of Clairvius Narcisse, he reported that the master's wife fed salt to the enslaved in order to help set them free. And in the case of bromonism, administering sodium chloride or salt helps the body to excrete bromide. And thus salt is actually one of the known treatments for bromonism. This is actually one of the things that is very popular in zombie folklore.
Yeah, if you feed salt to the zombies, they could turn on their overlords. So it would change their chemistry in a certain way that would cause them to come to themselves, I guess.
So what were some of the symptoms of bromonism, Jess?
Yeah, some of the symptoms of bromonism include a stupor, slurred speech, abnormal gait, and other symptoms described in your zombie folklore, basically.
So yes, bromonism may be one of the ways to maybe not induce zombification, but to keep someone in a zombie state. Jessica, did you know that they actually have an anti-zombie law in Haiti?
Yes. Article 249 of the Haitian Penal Code states, "It shall also be qualified as attempted murder, the employment which may be made against any person using substances which, without causing actual death, produce a lethargic coma more or less prolonged. If after the person has been buried, the act shall be considered murder, no matter what result follows."
So if you have it in your mind to go to Haiti and learn to create zombies, it is officially outlawed.
As it should be.
Today, zombies are everywhere in pop culture, and the genre permeates movies, books, stage, and television. And while Hollywood is not the true origin of this phenomena, it is actually based on fact, culture, and real-life Haitian zombies, just like Clairvius Narcisse. Perhaps, as a society, we gobble it up because zombies serve as a very fitting metaphor for our day. We have fears of pandemic, hard lives without reward, loss of control, or loss of humanity. While the Hollywoodized zombies remain a myth and a zombie apocalypse is not likely to occur, there are enough fictional ones to satisfy the genre for years to come. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us. We will see you next time.
Bye.
All right, folks, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing through your favorite podcast player. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember that if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, you can email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, or you can submit that experience through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So, until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.